He used to say it like a mantra. Status, Elara. That's what separates people like me from people like you. Every time he said it, he didn't even sound cruel, just convinced. As if it were a universal truth, like gravity. I used to laugh it off, tell myself he didn't mean it that way. But over time, his tone became sharper, colder. He meant every word. When I first met Ryan, he wasn't a monster. He was magnetic. The kind of man who could charm a boardroom and a bartender in the same breath. I was fresh out of grad school designing interiors for boutique hotels, proud of every dollar I made, even if it barely covered rent. He was already wearing custom suits, already talking about stock portfolios, already making everyone in the room feel smaller. He told me once over dinner that he liked me because I was humble. I thought it was a compliment. I didn't realize he meant harmless. Our marriage was fast whirlwind romance, champagne, destination, wedding. He called it a merger of passion and potential. I should have known that when a man describes love like a business transaction, he'll treat your heart like an expendable asset. For the first 2 years, I played the part of the perfect wife, the one who smiled at charity galas, who laughed at jokes I didn't find funny, who nodded politely when people called me Ryan's wife as if that were my full identity. I decorated our penthouse, managed our home, and even started helping with the design firm he wanted to open for his luxury properties. He said, "You have taste, Elara, but no ambition." That was the first fracture. Because he wasn't wrong, I'd let his world consume mine. The irony is, everything he flaunted was something I helped shape. The parties he hosted, the homes that dazzled his clients, every corner was my vision. I was the invisible artist behind his status. And yet, he used to say, people like you don't create status, they decorate it. That one hurt more than I'd ever admit. The night it all began to unravel, we were at a gala, one of those glimmering events where everyone pretends they care about charity but are really comparing watches. Ryan was talking to a potential investor, a woman named Claudia, elegant, poised, the kind of person who said, "Darling," like punctuation. I walked up just as she touched his arm. "Oh, this must be your assistant," she said. Ryan didn't correct her. He just smiled. That smile, that tiny, cruel hesitation, was the moment something inside me shifted. I didn't say a word at the gala. I didn't argue in the car. I just watched the man beside me, his reflection glowing in the window, and realized I wasn't married to a partner. I was a prop in a story he was writing about himself. 2 weeks later, I found the first real betrayal. A phone left unlocked. A series of messages. Photos from his business trip in Milan. I didn't need to read them all, one was enough. Him and Claudia, on a yacht, champagne in hand. Her caption, "The view's better when you're next to power." I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, the skyline glittering through the window, and laughing, not from humor but from recognition. I finally understood what I'd been to him. A stepping stone. A well-dressed accessory to his rise. When he came home, I was calm. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why. I just said, "You're right, Ryan. You do have status. Congratulations." He smirked, like it was a game he'd already won. "You'll be fine," he said, pouring himself a drink. "You always land on your feet. Just maybe aim a little lower next time. Men like me don't come around twice." That was the last time I let him finish a sentence that defined me. When he left the next morning, I didn't chase him. I didn't beg. I sat at the marble counter of the home I'd designed, the one that looked like success but felt like a cage, and made a decision. I wasn't going to destroy him. I was going to outgrow him. That's the part men like Ryan never see coming. They think silence means surrender. But sometimes silence means strategy. I sold what I could sell, my car, my jewelry, everything he'd ever bought me, as if they were medals for submission. I took that money and bought something of my own, a small, run-down warehouse on the edge of the design district. To anyone else, it looked like a bad investment. To me, it looked like freedom. I started small. Freelance design gigs, consultations, renovations for boutique hotels that couldn't afford big firms. I worked nights, weekends, sometimes slept at the warehouse, sketching ideas until my fingers cramped. Every time exhaustion hit, I'd hear his voice, "People like you don't create status." So I did. Not for him. Not to prove anything, but to build something that was mine. 3 years later, that warehouse had a name, Studio. By the fourth, it had clients in Paris, Dubai, and New York. And by the fifth year, the same week, Ryan and Claudia made the cover of a lifestyle magazine as luxury's power couple. My company's designs graced the cover of Architectural Digest. The caption? The woman redefining modern luxury. I didn't text him. I didn't post a thing. I just smiled because I knew he'd see it. He'd built his empire on arrogance. I built mine on silence. And one of those foundations was stronger. Success has a strange way of echoing. It doesn't shout. It hums low, steady, unbothered until the people who tried to silence you start hearing it in their sleep. That's what began happening with Ryan. At first, he ignored me, or pretended to. He'd see my name tagged under design awards or press articles and make offhand comments in interviews. She's talented, he said once, smiling for the cameras. She learned everything she knows from me. I remember watching that clip from my office, sipping coffee, and laughing quietly. He didn't know yet that the very clients funding his new developments were already contacting me for collaborations discreetly, carefully, because they liked his buildings but loved my vision. I didn't need to ruin him. He was doing that perfectly on his own. Claudia had turned his life into a never-ending showcase: events, sponsorships, vacations dressed up as business trips. The kind of luxury that looks expensive but costs integrity. The tabloids called them architectural royalty. Behind the photos, their projects were failing. Designs rushed, budgets mismanaged, deadlines missed. And word travels fast in luxury real estate. By then, Studio had grown beyond anything I'd dared dream. We weren't chasing clients anymore, they were chasing us. I'd hired a team of 12 designers, every one of them someone who'd been overlooked or underestimated somewhere else. We didn't just build spaces, we built redemption. The night everything shifted, I was at a charity gala, the kind I used to attend on Ryan's arm. Only this time, I wasn't a +1. I was the keynote speaker. I walked in wearing a black silk gown I'd designed myself, minimalist, sharp, confident. People turned their heads not because of the dress, but because they knew my name. I didn't belong to anyone's introduction anymore. I was the introduction. Halfway through the evening, I spotted them, Ryan and Claudia, seated near the stage. Her diamonds sparkled under the lights. His smile was stretched tight, rehearsed. The host announced me, "Please welcome Elara Morgan, the visionary redefining contemporary luxury design." As the spotlight found me, I saw Ryan's jaw clench. Just slightly. That was enough. I gave my speech. Not about success or revenge, but about resilience. About how the true measure of design of anything is not what it looks like, but what it withstands. People applauded. Claudia didn't. She just whispered something to Ryan and stared at me like she'd swallowed glass. After the event, while photographers swarmed, Ryan approached me. "Elara," he said, that charming tone back in place. "You've done well for yourself." "Thank you," I replied, smiling. "I learned from the best." He chuckled, trying to sound casual. "Maybe we could collaborate again someday. Nostalgia sells, you know." I tilted my head. "I think nostalgia's all you have left." His smile faltered for just a second, but that second told me everything. For the first time, he realized he was no longer the one with power. A week later, my assistant handed me a contract proposal. It was from Haven Developments, Ryan's company. They wanted Studio to design the interiors for their newest high-rise project in Dubai. It wasn't charity. They needed me. Their investors were demanding a female-led design partnership for PR reasons, and my firm had the reputation they craved. I stared at the logo on that proposal for a long time, his empire, now bending toward mine. I signed it, not out of pettiness, but precision. The first meeting took place in his office, the same one I'd helped design years ago. I walked in confident, poised, no trace of the woman who once waited for his approval. Claudia was there too, trying to hide the tension between them. I could see the cracks, her impatience, his defensiveness. The shine was fading fast. We discussed timelines, materials, budgets. Ryan interrupted constantly. Tried to reassert control. At one point, I leaned forward and said quietly, "If you hired me to decorate your ego, this meeting's over. But if you want results, you'll let me lead." The silence that followed was almost cinematic. He didn't argue. Over the next 6 months, I ran that project like a surgeon, efficient, precise, creative. My team respected me. His employees admired me. Investors loved me. Ryan? He watched, helpless, as his own board began asking my opinion over his. The building launched under budget, ahead of schedule, and sold out within days. Headlines called it a triumph of vision and reinvention. But they didn't mention Ryan's name once. 2 weeks after the launch, a journalist called me for a profile piece. She wanted to talk about resilience after betrayal. I said, betrayal is just a harsh form of feedback. When the article came out, the title made me smile. The woman who designed her own comeback. Ryan called that night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, a mixture of pride and pleading. "You were always meant for this, Elara. I just wish you'd seen it sooner. Maybe we could start again." Start again. Like he hadn't already finished me once. The next morning, I sent his company an invoice for the final payment, one that included a clause revoking future creative rights. He'd never use my work again to elevate his image. Days later, rumors started spreading, investors pulling out, partners distancing themselves. Claudia left him, publicly, dramatically, citing irreconcilable values. It made the business pages. Ryan's empire was cracking. And this time, I didn't have to lift a finger. I remember standing in my office window that evening, watching the city lights blur into gold and glass. My reflection looked different now, not softer, but solid, the kind of solid that comes after surviving every collapse they said you wouldn't. And for the first time since he told me I'd never match his status, I whispered the truth out loud. "I don't match it, Ryan. I surpassed it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. When you build your life on arrogance, even marble cracks. Ryan always thought he was untouchable, a man too polished to fall, too powerful to be replaced. But empires built on ego always collapse the same way, quietly at first, then all at once. It started with a whisper. One of his investors called me, nervous, asking if I knew why Ryan had stopped answering emails. I didn't. But I knew that tone. I'd heard it before, back when I was the one patching up his messes in silence. A week later, another call came, this time from a journalist who'd interviewed us both before. "Elara," she said, "is it true Haven Developments is in debt? Ryan hasn't paid contractors in months." Debt. The word didn't surprise me. He'd always lived like the world was a credit card with no limit. His office was a museum of ego Italian furniture, $15,000 watches displayed like trophies, even a chandelier imported from France just because it matched his aura. I didn't say a word to the press. I didn't deny, I didn't confirm. I'd learned the beauty of silence. It lets people write their own confessions. By the end of the month, the truth surfaced. Haven Developments had defaulted on 3 major loans. Investors were suing. Subcontractors were walking off projects. Claudia, ever the opportunist, sold her shares before the crash and posted a cryptic quote on Instagram: "Sometimes, love is just an expensive mistake." The media feasted on it. Luxury mogul faces financial meltdown. From penthouse to panic, inside Ryan Cole's fall. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. Because I knew this wasn't karma, it was just cause and effect. He'd built his world on the illusion of control, and now the illusion was dissolving. 2 weeks later, I got a call I didn't expect from his mother, Evelyn. She was kind, elegant, the one person in his family who'd ever treated me like more than an accessory. Her voice trembled when she said, "Elara, he's losing everything. He won't admit it, but he's scared." I wanted to say, so was I, once when he made me feel small. When he said, I'd never match him. But instead, I said, "I hope he learns something from it." She sighed. "He's not built for humility." "No," I replied softly, "but maybe it's time he learns construction." The irony. While his empire was burning, mine was expanding. We opened offices in Paris and London within 6 months. My face was on magazine covers, not as someone's wife, but as someone's architect of her own fortune. I started mentoring young women designers, artists, entrepreneurs, women who had once been told they were too soft, too emotional, too female to lead. One of them asked me during a workshop, "How do you know when you've won?" I smiled and said, "When you stop needing them to lose." But fate has a sense of drama, doesn't it? Because just when I thought I'd closed the chapter, Ryan walked back into my life, not the man I'd married, but a ghost wearing his face. It was a rainy Friday afternoon. I was leaving the E.M. studio building when I saw him standing by the door, soaked, clutching an umbrella that didn't even work. His hair was longer, his suit wrinkled, his confidence, that sharp, blinding armor, was gone. "Elara," he said, voice breaking slightly. "You look incredible." I looked at him quietly. "You look human." He tried to smile, but his eyes gave him away, red, desperate, hollow. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer, but I didn't walk away either. We ended up in the cafe across the street, the same one we used to visit when we were newlyweds and still pretending we were equals. He told me everything. The bankruptcy filings, the frozen accounts, the investors who'd turned on him. Claudia had taken what little was left and fled to Europe. The penthouse was gone. The cars repossessed. "I lost everything," he said quietly, staring into his untouched coffee. "No," I replied. "You lost the things you thought made you everything." He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw the man beneath the ego, scared, flawed, lost. He whispered, "You must hate me." I shook my head. "No, Ryan. I outgrew hating you. It's like resenting a teacher for the lesson that changed your life." He laughed bitterly. "Some lesson." I leaned back, my tone calm, even kind. "You once told me I'd never match your status. But status fades, Ryan. Substance doesn't. You taught me that by example." He ran a hand through his hair, defeated. "I don't know how to start over." "You start small," I said. "That's how I did it." He looked at me with disbelief. "You'd help me?" "No." I replied softly. "But I'll wish you luck." He nodded slowly, realizing what that meant. No revenge. No reconciliation. Just closure. And somehow, that hit harder than cruelty ever could. As I walked out of the cafe, rain still falling, I saw his reflection in the window, alone, fragile, watching me leave the way I once watched. To him. The difference was, I wasn't walking away broken. I was walking home. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on the balcony of my new penthouse, one I'd bought entirely with my own money. The city lights shimmered below, and for the first time, I felt peace instead of pressure. I thought of the girl who once believed status was measured by the man beside her. And I whispered to her across time, "You were never beneath him. You were just building quietly while he was performing loudly." Sometimes, the most beautiful kind of revenge is living a life that doesn't require explanation. And as thunder rolled over the skyline, I raised my glass to the ruins of his empire and the foundation of my own. Because status can be lost. But self-worth, once you build it, it never collapses. Peace is louder than applause. That's what I learned in the years after Ryan's fall. Because while the world gossiped about how the luxury king had lost his empire, I was busy building something quieter, something stronger, a life that didn't depend on proving anyone wrong, just living right. Success used to feel like a race. Now it feels like rhythm. I moved my studio into a restored brick building near the waterfront, sunlight spilling across open floors, green plants trailing from the beams, laughter echoing where exhaustion used to live. My team grew from 12 designers to 50. We weren't just designing homes anymore. We were designing stories. Hotels that felt like sanctuaries, art spaces that empowered women, eco-homes that healed communities. We called our new movement soul architecture. The press ate it up, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was walking into work and seeing a 23-year-old intern beam because her ideas made it to a client pitch. Or watching a single mom designer close her first six-figure deal because we'd built a studio that valued life as much as deadlines. Freedom looked different. Now not flashy, not loud, just full. One morning, during a magazine interview, the journalist asked, "Elara, what drives you now that you've achieved everything?" I smiled and said, "Peace of mind." I spent years chasing validation that couldn't fill me. Now I build spaces that remind people they already have everything they need. The article's title read, "The Woman Who Turned Heartbreak into Blueprint." And for once, it didn't feel like a headline. It felt like truth. Then, one spring afternoon, I received a letter hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a photo of Ryan's old office. Empty. For sale. Below it, a note in his handwriting, "You were right. You surpassed me. I hope you're happy." No bitterness. No excuses. Just a full stop. I placed it in a drawer and didn't feel anger or pity, just gratitude that he'd finally seen what I had all along. Life, like architecture, is about foundations. And mine wasn't built from status. Anymore, it was built from silence, struggle, and self-respect. My days became softer. Mornings began with black coffee on the balcony, barefoot on marble floors I'd chosen myself. Evenings ended with music, friends, laughter, people who knew me as Elara, not Mrs. Cole. Sometimes I'd look out at the skyline, the one we used to chase together, and smile. Because now it looked back at me on my own terms. But the biggest change wasn't in my career or home. It was in how I saw love. I used to think love was about sacrifice, about proving you could endure anything for someone. Now I know love is about peace. About someone who doesn't need you to shrink so they can shine. 2 years after the cafe encounter, I met someone new. His name was Liam, a travel photographer with eyes that had seen too much of the world to be impressed by status. We met at a design conference in Kyoto, both running late, both spilling coffee, both laughing before we even knew each other's names. He didn't ask what I did. He asked what made me feel alive. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't talk about success. I talked about sunsets over scaffolding, about creating beauty out of ruins, about resilience that looked like art. He listened like my words were worth their weight in gold. It wasn't love at first sight. It was respect at first silence. He didn't fill the room, he fit into it. He didn't save me, he saw me. When he visited my studio months later, he stopped in front of a massive photograph hanging in the lobby, a picture of a crumbling mansion with a single flower blooming through the concrete. "What's this one called?" he asked. I said, "Rebirth." He smiled. "Fitting." That night, as we walked by the waterfront, he said, "You build spaces people want to live in. But you also build lives people want to live like." It hit me then, that was the real legacy. Not the awards, not the penthouses, not even the empire I'd built from scratch. But the proof that you can rise without revenge. That you can fall apart without breaking. That you can outgrow everything they said you couldn't survive. A few months later, I got an invitation, a private event at the Architecture Association's annual gala. The same one Ryan used to dominate. They were giving me an award, Architect of Influence, for redefining the meaning of luxury. As I stood on that stage, I didn't see the room full of applause. I saw the girl I used to be standing in that same crowd years ago, invisible beside a man who thought status made him God. Now, I was the story. The voice. The legacy. My speech was simple. I used to believe power meant being seen. Now I know it means being whole. Luxury isn't marble floors or glass towers. It's peace, purpose, and people who remind you who you are. The audience rose in applause, but I didn't look for Ryan in the crowd. Because I'd already seen him in my past, and that was enough. Later that night, I walked out onto the terrace, the city humming below. Liam slipped his hand into mine. The wind was cool, the world was quiet, and for once, my reflection in the window didn't look like a survivor. It looked like a woman who had finally come home to herself. I turned to him and whispered, "He once said I'd never match his status." Liam smiled, eyes soft in the city light. He was right. I raised an eyebrow. He added, "You didn't match it. You transcended it." And as the moonlight hit the skyline, a skyline filled with buildings I'd designed, spaces I'd shaped, I finally understood. Status fades. Stories don't. And mine? Wasn't just about losing a man. It was about finding the woman I was always meant to be. They say freedom is something you earn. But the truth is, it's something you reclaim. Piece by piece, word by word, until there's nothing left that belongs to anyone else. It took me years to understand that. One morning, I woke before sunrise, the city still half asleep outside my window. My penthouse, the one I'd built from nothing, was filled with the quiet hum of life, the faint sound of the ocean beyond the skyline, the steady rhythm of rain against the glass, the kind of peace that never needed to be announced. I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. Below me, the world was waking up, cars starting, lights flickering, people rushing to build their dreams. I smiled, realizing I'd finally built mine. Not for applause. Not for proof. Just for me. My phone buzzed on the table. A news alert. Ryan Cole declared bankrupt. Former luxury architect turns to teaching. There was a picture him standing in front of a classroom, chalk dust on his sleeve, a small, uncertain smile on his face. And I didn't feel anger. Not pity either. Just stillness. Maybe, in his own way, he'd found a kind of peace too. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending to be more than human. I sent him a single message, the first in years. Teaching suits you. Maybe now you'll build something real. He never replied, but that was okay. Some stories don't need closure, they just need distance. That afternoon, I met with a group of young women designers, entrepreneurs, dreamers. We sat on the studio floor, surrounded by sketches and coffee cups. They asked questions about business, balance, and betrayal. One girl, maybe 21, asked softly, "How do you move on from someone who made you feel small?" I told her the truth. You don't move on, you grow past. There's a difference. Moving on means forgetting. Growing past means remembering, but without pain. Her eyes filled with something I recognized, the first spark of healing. And I realized that maybe this was the point all along. To turn my story into someone else's permission slip. After they left, I found myself alone again, the sun dipping low. The studio glowing gold. I walked to the far wall where I'd hung an old photograph, the first building Ryan and I had ever designed together. Cracked, dated, a little crooked. I kept it there to remind myself of beginnings, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. Then, beside it, another frame, the cover of Architects World magazine, featuring me under the headline, Elara Morgan, the woman who designed her own freedom. I laughed softly. Freedom wasn't something I designed. It was something I discovered the moment I stopped waiting for permission. That evening, Liam came home from his latest trip, windblown, sunburned, camera strap slung around his shoulder. He dropped his bag and pulled me into a hug that felt like home. "Missed me?" he teased. "Every second," I said. He handed me a photo, a candid shot he'd taken somewhere in the Moroccan desert. A little girl standing barefoot, stacking stones into a perfect tower, her smile wide and fearless. "Thought you'd like it," he said. "She reminded me of you." I looked at it, that pure determination in her eyes, and nodded. "Yeah," I whispered. "She reminds me of me too." Later, we sat on the balcony, watching the lights come alive across the skyline. He asked, "If you could go back and change one thing, would you?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No," I said. "If I hadn't broken, I never would have rebuilt. And if I hadn't been buried, I never would have learned how to rise." He smiled and wrapped his arm around me. "Then here's to rising." As the city pulsed below us, I raised my glass again, not to revenge, not to victory, but to peace. To the kind of success that doesn't shout, it simply exists. Because I realized something that night. Luxury isn't diamonds or penthouses or the weight of a last name. It's the ability to wake up every morning knowing you belong entirely to yourself. Before bed, I opened my journal, the same one I'd kept since those early days when survival was my only goal. I wrote one final entry. He said I'd never match his status. But status fades, freedom stays. And peace is the truest luxury of all. I closed the book, turned off the lights, and let the silence fill the room. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of arrival. Of finally being enough. After a lifetime of being told I wasn't. Because in the end, the empire I built wasn't made of glass or steel. It was made of grace. And this time it would never collapse.